Thank you for joining us for today's webinar on strategies to detect and stop synthetic attacks. I'm Scott Ellis, Director of Brand and Creative for Dayon, and our presentation today will be led by Connor White, Dayon's President of New Industries, and Sean Kafash, the Product Manager for our new deepfake protection tool, Sentinel. Before we get started, I want to let everyone know that you'll be muted throughout the presentation. If you have questions, please type them in the chat box in your webinar interface. At the end of the presentation, we will have a Q&A period where we'll cover as many questions as possible, and anything we don't cover, we will respond to via email. If you have technical issues with the webinar, please email repps@dayon.com, and we will do our best to assist you. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Dayon, we're a software company that focuses on fraud prevention and identity assurance. Our goal, as business continues to move online with identities being represented by proxies like devices or passwords, is to bring the human back into identity transactions. We do that by developing technology that accurately and easily identifies who a person is in order to protect businesses, their customers, and their data from identity fraud. At Dayon, we prove identities so that businesses can trust who they're doing business with, and customers can trust that their identities are being protected. Dayon's families of solutions focus on three major areas: proofing and verification for onboarding, account authentication for account access, and fraud prevention for the contact center. Each of our solutions is truly cross-channel, allowing customers to connect via web, mobile, voice, kiosk, and even in person. And we provide all of those services in a single platform to ensure seamless interaction throughout the identity lifecycle, something we call identity continuity. Since 2000, Dayon has been trusted to provide identity and fraud protection services to Tier 1 organizations in banking, telecom, insurance, travel and hospitality, and the public sector, among other industries. We process approximately 250 million transactions a day in our various deployments globally and have secured over 1 billion identities globally. Now I'm going to turn things over to Connor White to begin our presentation on deepfake and synthetic voices.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you to all of you who have joined our webinar today. I hope you find it informative. So I'm going to dive into deepfakes and the threats they pose. We will explore what is happening today in terms of fraud, and importantly, what we are seeing as emerging threats and what's likely to happen in the near future. But I will also cover how to deal with these threats. The bad news is that the emergence of generative adversarial networks, large language models, synthetic voice generators, and the continuing proliferation of stolen identity data has made deepfake attacks much easier to execute, much cheaper to execute, and much more successful when they happen. But the good news is that we can deal with it. There are tools available to us, some well established and some that are actually quite new, that can effectively thwart these attacks. And I'll walk through the options available and what we see as best practice in that regard. Okay, so let's jump into it. Just waiting for the slide. Okay. So our focus for today's webinar is on deepfake attacks on contact centers in particular, as these currently pose the area of greatest risk, often described as the soft underbelly of the organization from a fraud perspective. But it's important to recognize that deepfake attacks can occur at any point in an organization's digital identity perimeter. Whether it's opening an account through a digital identity verification or proofing process, such as on your smartphone, or authenticating to a web or mobile app to make a payment or transfer funds to a different account. Anywhere where we are asking for proof that a person is real presents an opportunity for a deepfake attack. When guarding against these attacks, it's very important that organizations look holistically at their entire digital identity perimeter. It only takes one crack in the fence for the fraud actors to pour through and cause untold financial and reputational damage. For example, making sure that you can detect fake photos and videos is super important in the account opening process, as is making sure you detect and deal with fake documents. We Dayon have 20 years of global experience and hundreds of customers whom we protect daily against these types of frauds, including against fraud, including these types of deepfake attacks. There are technologies and techniques, business processes, etc., to deal with these attacks, but the scope of this webinar isn't to discuss these in detail. However, if you would like to learn more about how we can help you in these areas, please feel free to reach out to us using the links provided at the end of the webinar. But for now, let's focus on an area that has traditionally been the most vulnerable, and that is the contact center. So to be clear, deepfakes aren't something imaginary. They aren't sci-fi, something coming next year, or something we need to deal with, in years hence. They're here today. I put up 6 different images here. All are examples of deepfakes that have occurred. So imagine receiving a call from your CEO requesting an urgent transfer of company funds, only to discover later it was a sophisticated synthetic voice impersonation. This has happened, and it has succeeded. It's, like I said, it's no longer sci-fi, it's reality, and it's the reality we face with deepfakes. So let's jump into some of these examples. One example was a journalist, Joseph Cox, who recently used a deepfake generator to clone his own voice and break into his bank account. And that's on the web. We can send you details on the article if you'd like to see it. It's been cited multiple times. Another example, going back as far as 2020, I believe, criminals used a deepfake of a Dubai bank director's voice to trick a Hong Kong bank manager. It was a Japanese registered company, if I recall, into transferring $35 million. And that highlighting, again, the sophistication of fraud based on deepfake and deepfake voice in this particular case. In another example last year, hackers used a deepfake hologram of a cryptocurrency company's chief communications officer to deceive executives into revealing confidential information on Zoom calls. And we've seen multiple social engineering attacks with deepfake audio. These scams often target employees with fake voicemails, impersonating CEOs or supervisors to authorize transactions, approve invoices, disclose sensitive information. It's topical today. Some of you may have seen recent examples of the celebrity deepfake attacks, such as Tom Hanks, and even this week, for example, a fake Taylor Swift advertising a bogus giveaway for, I probably won't pronounce the name right, Le Creuset kitchenware. Sorry, Swifties, this was not real, but let's get ready. This type of attack is only going to get worse. And then, unfortunately, in what I think is one of the most awful crimes we're hearing today about voice clones of family members being used to scam individuals out of large sums of money. No parent wants to receive a call from what sounds like a panicked child to say that they've been taken. That's just a nightmare I hope none of us ever go through. A recent example was a 82-year-old Texan who was scammed out of, I believe, $17,000 when he received a call that he needed to bail his son-in-law out of jail. And of course, his son was not arrested at all. But he jumped on it because it was urgent, and unfortunately he lost that money. So AI has been weaponized by fraudsters, and we're entering an era where trust is being fundamentally shattered by these nefarious examples. And these are I've just given you 6 quick examples there, but the bottom line is there are hundreds of these taking place every day, and it's just going to get worse. In fact, it's going to get much worse, and all industries are affected, not just financial services. We are seeing deepfake attack attempts in banking, payments, wealth management, but also in healthcare, social media, government, to citizen services, gaming, and more. I read somewhere recently that the global losses from deepfakes are projected to reach 250 billion by 2027. And that's an incredibly large number, and it's going to grow quickly even beyond that. So beyond financial losses, which we've talked about here, deepfakes can erode other things like brand trust. They can damage customer relationships and disrupt critical operations. We all know about denial of service attacks on the web when websites are not available to us, but think about contact centers for a moment. Malicious actors could deepfake large volumes of fake customer calls to overwhelm a contact center, and disrupt their operations, causing financial losses and dramatic reputational damage. Spreading synthetic media depicting events or statements by other companies, for example, could impact their stock prices and benefit a hacker financially if they've shorted the stock or are waiting for it to drop to buy back in. And targeting individuals or executives in financial crimes with manipulated videos or audio could threaten their safety and force all sorts of nefarious financial transactions to take place or disclosing of sensitive information. Governments are waking up to the threat, both here in the US and overseas, and advocating for ethical uses and proposing legislation and criminal penalties. The EU, for example, has recently issued laws on this. Okay, so let's jump into traditional contact center fraud for a second. You know, how does it take place today? Well, we all know that so much of our private data has been compromised and sold on the web, on the dark web. So there's a saying in the security industry, there are two types of people: those whose data has been stolen and those who don't know that their data has been stolen. I know mine has been stolen, for example. I was part of some of the breaches that you'll have seen in the past couple of years. In fact, I'm pretty certain every one of us on this call has. So bottom line, for all of us, much of our personal data is available to hackers, and hackers today can take this data, create a dossier for a person, somebody who wants to impersonate me, and have members of their organization make calls to companies. For example, they'll know who I bank with and try to impersonate me. It doesn't always work, and fraudsters have to hire, but it does sometimes. But fraudsters have to hire, train, and incentivize their hacker armies. And they have to, you know, they take them through training, they mentor them. These are sophisticated fraud organizations. They run them like companies. But people grow tired from making these calls. You know, they don't always stick to the script. And in many cases, they sound completely different than the person they're trying to impersonate. So the person at the other end, the agent, for example, can become suspicious and can take remedial action. So it doesn't always work, but it works well enough for them to still make a lot of money, okay? Because we continue to see them do it. So let's jump forward now to what an AI-powered contact center fraud attack looks like. And again, I'll walk you through this, but we've replaced the human here with some technology components. And what if we could replace them, put these together to create a computer running an AI bot, right, a chat bot, if you like. And what if that computer could interact with the IVR or the contact center in a way that seemed real, listening to what is being communicated to it, correctly answering questions because it has that dossier of knowledge about me, and when asked to do so, and then doing it all in a conversational tone while loosely following a pre-programmed script to gain control over the account. And when I say in a conversational tone, mimicking my mid-50s Caucasian, you know, half Irish, half American accent, right, or something similar to that, and doing it very, very conversationally so it comes across as real to the person who's listening. Quite simply, it's now possible to train a large language model to have a conversation with an IVR or an agent in real time, using a real-time generated voice that sounds like the person they're trying to impersonate, without the person at the other end realizing it's a fake. And if you're familiar with the British scientist Alan Turing and his famous Turing tests to determine whether a human can detect if the counterparty to a conversation was in fact a human or an AI, we are way past the Turing test these days. It's so out of date. So moving forward, if we go back to the traditional approach, one of the biggest problems for these hackers has been the scaling of their attacks, okay? To scale these attacks really to the next level, they have to hire, they have to pay, they have to train the people to impersonate the callers. This all takes time, money, and effort. In addition, people grow tired of making calls. They, you know, sometimes getting stopped, sometimes getting through, hanging up, trying again and again and again until they're successful. It's a mundane activity. It pays dividends, clearly, but people, even hackers, dislike mundane, repetitive tasks, and it takes time and money. So we haven't seen the level of scale that we could see with humans so far, right? With these attacks, excuse me, so far, because the human at the other end has been the gating factor. Computers, on the other hand, love repetition. And once you take the time to train and build an AI bot, cloning it that can have these conversations and deepfake voices and so on, and then clone it into thousands is just a matter of forking additional processes and providing the compute power to run these processes on. And computers don't grow tired. They don't need breaks. They don't get disheartened. They don't go to sleep. They're machines. They operate reliably, cheaply, and very, very efficiently. And they never give up. I call this sometimes the tsunami, the coming tsunami of fraud, especially in the contact center. So times are changing. We have lived through multiple generations of fraud. You know, initially back in the 60s, we had, you know, in the 70s and 80s, we had people hacking people. The late Kevin Mitnick was famous for, you know, calling up and acting very panicked and asking somebody to reset his password for an executive. That was social engineering. That's how he, most of the time when he he was one of the early hackers when he got into organizations. It was through social engineering, people hacking people. Then we had people hacking machines. You know, the old days, people would deploy a computer, a mini computer, a mainframe, and forget to change the password. So you start dialing in modems and you type in the standard username and password and see if somebody had forgotten to change it, right? That was an example of humans hacking machines. Then we have machines hacking machines, such as distributed denial of service attacks that we're all familiar with on the web and so on. But now it's different. It's in fact very different. For the first time, we're entering an era where machines can actually hack people and do it at a scale we haven't seen before. So think about that for a moment. It's a frightening thought. But all is not lost, okay? And I promise to go through the ways we can guard against this, and I will. And there are a number of tools at our disposal to defeat these hackers and keep this threat of this coming tsunami, if you like, at bay. So let's jump into them. And before I get too deep in it, I want to bring it back to two core adages that I learned when I first started in this industry 20 years ago, and it's driven a lot of what we do. First one is, you know, bad guys have to succeed once, we have to succeed every time. Back to, you know, they'll keep coming. So we have to put up sufficiently good barriers to keep them away, despite over and over and over again these oncoming attacks. And it's all about fraud signals and threat analysis. And so it's not always about finding the needle in the haystack. It's often about blowing away the hay, the good guys, so that only the needles are left, or blowing away the hay so it doesn't even get in, right? Because you're able to deploy something that keeps them at bay before they get inside they even get to the inner part of the authentication process for your company. So let's jump into how technology and AI-driven approaches in particular can help us do that. Okay, so before I begin going through these techniques that can protect us from deepfakes, I want to preface this by saying that no technique is 100% perfect, and no company or person should ever tell you it is, because if they do, they're just honestly not competent. Each of these has its strengths and vulnerabilities, but together, the items I'm going to outline here are a very, very formidable defense against deepfakes. So let's start with the first one. You know, there are a bunch of fraud indicators that we can detect that are tied to the device. I call these collectively phone or device signals. One example is ANI, or automatic number identification, and detecting when that's being spoofed. You've all seen this on your caller ID. I had a call one night from somebody who was spoofing my own phone number, which is really kind of surreal when you're sitting there and your home phone rings your home phone. And it's quite easy for hackers to forge or fake a telephone number and caller ID to mask where it's coming from. Technology exists today to help detect that. They're not foolproof, but they're kind of a minimal viable level of protection that you should deploy just to get rid of the silly stuff, right? And they can determine, for example, with a certain level of accuracy whether it's being spoofed, the ANI, and it's a fake number, or where it's coming from. If it's coming from overseas, for example, from a particular country or hotspot where we know fraud originates, and it's looking like it's meant to be coming from, for example, here in Virginia, and so on. But so these techniques they are available. They help, but by and of themselves, they're not sufficient. So the next thing to look at is contact center best practices, ensuring that your agents, when you're talking to somebody, can detect social engineering attacks and try and guard against them. Make sure they're well trained to detect these things. And we won't go into all that in today's call because there quite frankly isn't time, and we're focusing on the tech more than the processes. But if you'd like to learn more, please feel free to reach out to us and we'll schedule a call with you. But then we get into some really interesting stuff, and we call one of the techniques adaptive synthetic voice detection, or in its simplest form, a deepfake firewall, right? What if we could deploy a firewall in your contact center that could automatically detect when a voice is a deepfake and prevent it from going any further? This capability exists today. It's new, and it's proving very, very effective. And we'll spend a little bit more time discussing that later on in this presentation. We can also further enhance your security by adding additional layers, such as voice biometric authentication. By combining the deepfake firewall to keep, fake voices away, and for those that are not fakes, matching that to speaker authentication using biometrics, we can ensure A, that it's not a fake voice, and B, it's actually the real voice of the person we're supposed to be talking to, not somebody who's just trying to impersonate me with data. In addition, we can add technologies that detect replayed voices. For example, if an authentication phrase has been pre-recorded as being played back, we can now determine that it's not fake, that the voice belongs to the correct person, and it's not being replayed from a previous recording. That's a very, very secure way of dealing with deepfake attacks in the contact center. But these components, especially when combined together, they provide a very powerful defense. But there's more we could. There's even more we can do. One of my customers recently told me that close to 90% of their users, when they call their contact center, are doing so from their smartphone, and that number is growing every month. He says most of those have in this case it was a bank, have the bank's app installed on their device. So what if we could combine traditional contact center experience, either talking to an IVR or to an agent, with the smartphone experience, unifying all this into a multi-factor authentication. This is the identity continuity that Scott mentioned earlier and I mentioned earlier. So that we can then introduce this multi-factor authentication that is seamless and easy for an end customer. With this strategy, when you have visibility of a customer's engagement with you through all avenues, you can leverage tools like their smartphone and the app that's on their smartphone to send a simple push notification to authenticate them. Okay, and this is something they do every day when they're using the banking app anyway. For example, so if I'm on the phone to an agent, he says, well, I see, thank you, Mr. White, I see you're a member of a customer of the bank. Appreciate that. I see you're calling from your cell phone. I see you have the app. Would you mind, instead of I can skip all these questions I have to ask you, and I can just send you a push notification, and I just need you to tap on it. And I go, yep. That is a seamless, consistent, easy multi-factor authentication process, okay? That sits on top of all the other things we've done. And then when you combine that with biometrics on the smartphone, you've made sure it's me holding the phone at the time. It's very, very simple, very, very powerful user experience, but very, very secure. Okay, so we've unified all of these different techniques into one simple, seamless process for the end user. One of our customers tells me they save 45 seconds on average of every agent call using that approach. And so to sum up our recommended approach around this, and we're going to delve into some specific elements of this in a moment, organizations need a comprehensive approach, not just a deploy. There's no single technology that will solve this problem. It's going to get worse, the actual level of attacks, the sophistication of attacks, and the scale, the number of these concurrent attacks. You need to be part of an ecosystem where there's continuous research, analysis, and adaptation, so we can rapidly adapt to these. And while these techniques can be independently deployed, they work best when they're combined together. And we really do advocate, if you can, moving from a channel-centric. Sometimes people don't have the smartphone app, or they're calling from a landline, and then the channel-centric, you're still within the call center stack, if you like, is quite effective. It's very, very effective. But if you have the option to make it true multi-factor and a whole identity, customer-centric approach built off of a platform, that is, in our opinion, the right way to go. Okay, so on the previous slides, I mentioned a deepfake firewall, and I'm sure you have a lot of questions about it. How it works, how does it deploy? So let's spend a bit of time on that. And this is new to the market, but something we at Dayon have been working on for quite a number of years now. Being in the biometric authentication market, it's super important to us that we can detect real humans and from fake ones, whether it's facial, recognition, finger, or voice biometrics. And our product for detecting and dealing with fake voices is actually called actionable. And when we set out to build it, we worked with a core group of our customers to ensure it met their needs, and specifically design it for the key requirements that I'm showing you here on the right-hand side of the screen. It had to perform very well in terms of accuracy. And I'll spare you the details on these measures, except to say there's two important ones, APSIR and BPSIR. APSIR, which is short for Attack Presentation Classification Error Rate, is actually a measure of how well you detect deep fakes when they appear. And then BPSIR, or Bona Fide Presentation Classification Error Rate, is in the simplest form a measure of how well you ensure that a legitimate user isn't inadvertently classified as fake and therefore locked out of their account or rejected. Okay, and your goal, obviously, in both of these cases, APSIR and BPSIR, is to have it as close to zero as possible in terms of your error rates. Other core components that our customers needed, real-time signaling. I mean, this is no good if it tells me tomorrow that there was fraud yesterday, right? I need to know immediately as it's going on. Minimal user friction. We shouldn't have to make our users jump through hoops to be part of using this system. It should be, if at all possible, invisible to them. easy integration into the contact center itself. So there's lots of different contact center platforms out there. You can't rip and replace everything to deploy this firewall. It has to be standards based, open standards interfaces, and sit in the contact center environment with minimal disruption. Early detection in the call. So if I'm having a conversation with somebody and I need to know within the first 4-5 seconds that this is a fake voice, that allows me to quickly take action before I go too far. And then, very importantly, be universally applicable, all languages, all accents. So it works off, you don't have to be pre-trained on a specific accent, Caucasian, American, Asian, whatever. It should work against all accents and all languages and all dialects of languages universally. So these were challenges we set our team 3+ years ago as we worked with our customers. And we've built a product that does this and does it, we believe, pretty well. So with that, I'm going to hand you over to Sean Kafash. Sean is part of our product management team and oversees our deepfake firewall product. And he's going to provide some more details on it and show us all a quick demo. Thank you, and over to you, Sean.
Thanks, Connor. Great information so far. Good afternoon or good morning, everybody. Sean is my name. I'm going to run through 2 quick slides. One is going to be an overview of what we see the market needs that Sentinel solves. I'll run through a second slide in a moment of a bit more of a high-level overview of how Sentinel works, and then I'll run through a demonstration and pass back over to Connor. In terms of the market needs, so we firstly see that one of the biggest threats is indeed scale synthetic voice attacks. Connor alluded to this earlier. You can imagine a large amount of calls going into a call center from voices that sound real, human-like callers. A use case for this from a fraudster perspective would be if they had managed to obtain, let's say, 2 of my knowledge factor pins or points, such as my mother's maiden name, my date of birth. They could call with a synthetic voice that sounds like my accent, my gender, my age, and look to keep probing the agents until they eventually, through just brute force, get that answer. The second thing we see as a market need that we solve is clone and replays. Specifically, we know that some voice authentication systems have been bypassed by clones. Sentinel, we would see, would work alongside, so an additional security layer for these voice authentication systems. These 2 lead into the third point, which is ultimately protecting brand and reputation. 2 tier 1 banks have had their systems bypassed by clones. Obviously, reputationally not ideal from a customer's perspective, seeing that there is indeed vulnerabilities in bank systems. But outside of the negative press, one of the banks had the Senate regulators look for immediate response and actions. That's a drain on the bank's resources. It's time that's put towards away from the core activities. And so we would see Sentinel solving these market needs. And just waiting for the slide. Great, thank you. So how does it work? So this is a real-time solution. And by that we mean a call would go into a call center, and the call center infrastructure would pass 4-second audio chunks to Sentinel. Sentinel in turn would take this audio and pass it through 3 snap-ins, or you can consider snap-ins microservices. They would be first is a quality assurance snap-in, so that is to ensure that the quality of the voice is sufficient to actually be analyzed. We will see that sometimes quality is too poor to actually ascertain anything. That's the first layer. And the 2 following ones are replaying clones. And within those we look for artifacts. An artifact is a specific voice trait, such as the pauses between words and sentences, how many words are spoken per second, and how dynamic the voice are and the frequency are. Hopefully, as I'm speaking, I'm not monotone and just linear. You'll see spikes up and down. We have found that clones and replays are generally more programmatic. If you were to imagine it in a graph representation, a bit more rectangular and less dynamic, I guess. All right, I'm going to jump into the demonstration now. Just bear with me as I set this up. Great. Okay, for time's sake, I'm going to just start processing. I will say that this is a product we have released, but what you see in front of you here is a testing tool, an evaluation tool that we have built for our customers to use themselves, test their own audio, and find out the value of this service. You see 4 audio samples in front of you. They're in 2 groups. The first one is a clone. So I have 2 clones. I'm going to play a sample for you right now. This is the first one, clone Lily.
I have forgotten my banking login and I'd like to reset my online PIN. That
was the first clone, and here's our second clone, George.
I have forgotten my banking login and I'd like to reset my online PIN, please. My account number.
Okay, and now we have a second group, which is genuine. This is me speaking. You see there's 2, one's LQ and HQ. I constantly lose my headphones, and as such, I have stopped buying expensive ones, and these ones are quite cheap and generate quite poor quality audio. We've put this in to demonstrate that Sentinel can indeed process poor quality audio. You know, you would expect a distribution population will have good audio and poor audio. So if I just let you tune into this for a second.
I have forgotten my banking login. I'd like to reset my online PIN.
And here's the higher quality one.
I have forgotten my banking login and I'd like to reset my online PIN.
Okay. Sentinel has been processing as I've been speaking. We have done so to demonstrate, you know, this is what it would look like when deployed. It would be in real time. But I'm going to jump now into the results tab, and as expected, we have seen that Sentinel has flagged both Lily and George as clones, which they were, and my audio samples as genuine. And we have a graphic representation of the data in front of us, and that is a short demo, but just to hopefully demonstrate that there are indeed solutions that are currently available to protect against sophisticated scale synthetic voice and clone attacks. I'm now going to pass back to Connor, who's going to wrap us up.
Thank you, Sean. I'll just wait for the slide. Okay, so to reiterate, excuse me, something that Sean said, the deepfake firewall that he very quickly demonstrated is available today. What he actually showed us is a tool, if you like, that sits on top of the firewall that enables companies to very quickly evaluate the value of the firewall itself. And we would encourage you, if you're interested, that you can, you know, take the tool and you can build a corpus, if you like, of good voices and some potential fakes, and you can run them through this thing and you can see which ones it catches and which ones it lets through, and very quickly you'll see the value that it provides, right? So in closing, you know, this is an arms race that we're in, and these attacks will only get more sophisticated and better. But we do have defenses against them. It's not the end of the world. You know, every time I turn on the news or read some tech journal, it's more and more, you know, deep fakes are going to take over the world. You know, we can't trust anything. That's not true. I mean, yes, if we don't be smart about it, it'll happen. But there are things we can do today, especially in areas like this, in the contact centers, or even in identity verification and proofing, to really guard against these type of attacks. And let's not be naive. These attacks will get more sophisticated, and we will have to build better countermeasures. But we do have some very good viable countermeasures available to the market today as an industry. So we have these defenses. You cannot, though, defeat AI-powered attacks without AI-powered defenses. That's very clear, right? But we're here to help. So if you're interested in evaluating any of the stuff we've showed you today, or discussing it in more detail, and would like to simply learn more, please feel free to contact us at the web URL here, www.dayon.com/xsentinel, or via email at stopdeepfakes@dayon.com. Like I said, we're here to help. I'm a huge fan of ethical approaches to AI. Techniques such as constitutional AI are all very important, and we need strict governance and legal consequences for misuse. However, this will not deter the hackers, and so hoping that that in and of itself will be sufficient is a fruitless endeavor on the quick road to rampant fraud. Fraudsters will not abide by the rules. We need to have some of the best defenses we can against this. They are available. We're happy to help. And with that, I'll hand it over to any questions. Any questions from the audience? Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We have about 10 minutes left for questions. I will remind you that if you have a question, please type it into the chat. Our first question is, can we speak to the scalability of the tool for various sizes and complexities of organizations?
Sure, I'd be happy to take that one. Then if we're talking specifically about our products, we've designed them from day one to be extremely scalable, thousands of concurrent transactions per second. We have one customer that had a requirement, I believe, of a different product than our deepfake firewall, but 4,000 concurrent transactions per second, which we've achieved and exceeded actually. So everything is built off a very scalable framework. If you design it for scale, you can always downscale it. It's very hard to design something that's fundamentally not scalable and make it scale and you know, to millions of users. So the answer is yes, we can go from very large national level systems, pan-national, down to small local systems. In the case of the firewall, it's extremely fast. It takes about 3 or 4 seconds of voice before it's able to flag it. So it effectively runs at wire speed as the person is speaking. So and really has the resources it needs are more just compute, and it's not that intensive because we've done all the hard work of training it effectively. That takes a lot of CPU. Running the model in production is not that intensive.
Thank you, Connor. Second question. Deepfake technology seems to be changing at lightning speed. What are we doing to stay ahead of it? That's
a great question. You know, there's a number of things we do. We have a dedicated team of PhDs and you know, scientists, and that's all they do. They continuously research. They act like hackers. They try to break into our stuff. They work on these techniques. But you know, very importantly, so we keep an eye on everything that we're seeing in the market and every type of technique. As soon as we discover one, we build a countermeasure and we embed it into the products. But we also work with our customers, right? We have as you mentioned, Scott, you know, we've hundreds of customers globally. And so we learn from them, and they come back to us when something happens, when they figure out that there was a deepfake fraud attack. They work with us, and we take that. And I like this expression, you know, while we're a global company, so we have these global experiences. We bring those global experiences to every local implementation, and we learn from all over the world what's going on, and we bring it back into every deployment that we have. So it's a continuously iterative feeding network that allows us to quickly adapt. You know, we proactively look for these threats, deal with them, but we also adapt very, very quickly when we discover them or when our customers discover them.
Thank you, Connor. That looks like the end of the questions we have. Again, if you have further questions, you can email us at stopdeepfakes@dayon.com. Otherwise, we will end the webinar and we will send you all a recording. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.